Sometimes it feels like parenting is an Olympic sport, and I'm not talking about how exhausted we are at the end of every day. That's kind of just part of being a human. Instead, I'm talking about what happens certainly in some postcodes, in some parenting cohorts. There's just a lot going on. Today, we have a look at the competitive parenting culture and how we make sure that our kids are getting enough enrichment without being overscheduled. How do we get this balance right? G'day, welcome to the Happy Families podcast, real parenting solutions every day. On Australia's most downloaded parenting podcast, we are Justin and Kylie Coulson. Kylie, parenting sometimes feels like a gladiator sport. Even if you're not competing with everybody else, you just feel like you've run a marathon at the end of every day, especially with multiple kids and so many activities to be doing.
And I think it's even more complicated now that we've got social media and we're watching everybody else's lives in real time happening before us and feeling like we're behind the eight ball all the time. Massive,
what's the word? Amplification, magnification of it. I have a controversial take, and I know that this is going to be unfair in a lot of areas, but in some places I think that I'm bang on. I'm scared to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think sometimes there's this, I don't know if it's innate, maybe it's a social construction, but there are some pockets of our communities where mums are super competitive, and I think that it's hurting our children. Like from the time that they're born, my child is hitting these developmental milestones first. I've got a gifted child. They're winning everything. They're amazing. And I kind of feel like we get caught up in this parenting rugrat race where many people just want their kids to outshine everyone else's.
You're right. It is very controversial and provocative, and I don't agree entirely with you. I have watched it and I've seen the competitive streak in women in general and mums, but I do not believe it's innate.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think that culturally we have created an environment where we feel like it's dog eat dog. It's just in a totally different setting than...
Do you think it's the whole, I've got to fulfill my child's potential. I've got to help them to optimize every aspect of their development. Like that's well-intentioned rather than a competitive thing. It's not about beating everyone else. It's just about being the best because then you're being a model of the optimization that I've pushed you towards.
No, I think it's a scarcity mentality that there's not enough good jobs out there. There's not enough good places for my kid to be. And if they're not the best, then they're not going to have the life that I want them to have because I didn't get it when I was a kid, or I think it's more that than it is anything else.
All right, well, I'm fine with the not innate thing, but I still think that in some areas there's just this competitiveness. Sometimes it's well-intentioned. Other times I'm not convinced. And I'm going to point the finger squarely in the direction of the eastern suburbs of Sydney, although there are other pockets around the country that do this. I jumped online in prep for this podcast, and here's what I found. You can get your 18-month-old child signed up for ballet.
Wow.
I just want to let that sit for a sec. 18 months old, signing up for ballet.
I have seen your sister's feet.
Oh, my sister's a professional dancer. She's been dancing since she was a teenager, or maybe a little bit younger than that.
She's in her mid-30s.
Right.
And her...
They're not normal.
They're not in any way, shape or form.
You can sign your kids up for soccer at 3. Which, again, like kids don't need to be competing against other kids at 3. The ball is almost as big as the 3-year-olds, let's be honest. I found something, and this is legit, but it sounds so weird even to be saying it. You can literally get your 6-week-old involved in fitness classes, which is not really fitness for the kids. It's really just about, I guess, being with them and moving their bodies around. A special call out to Brain Thrive, which is music-based educational classes for 9-month-olds. Your kids aren't going to learn to be a brilliant guitarist, drummer, piano player at 9 months old. And we know that the baby Mozart stuff is not legit. Like there's no research to support that. And I hear this stuff and I just think it's competition. Like we're pushing our kids so hard because we want to maximize their potential. The financial burden of these programs on families, or maybe not in some places, maybe that's why it's happening. But for me, there's this bigger issue around the developmental readiness of children and what it teaches children about the world. And again, to stir the pot, it's actually a legitimate question. Why are we signing kids up for stuff at 6 weeks or 3 years old or 9-month-old Brain Thrive music classes and that kind of thing? I feel as though it's more for our validation than for their benefit.
So I'm going to push back on you again. I actually don't. I think that in some cases you're exactly right, but I actually think that there's two things happening. As parents, we're more distracted than we've ever been. And the idea that somebody is going to dictate what happens in any given space and allows us a mental break is an important point. But secondly, I think that as mothers in general, there is so much competing information out there. We've actually lost the ability to trust our own instincts and to value our own input and what we bring to our children's lives.
So speaking of losing the ability, is it possible? And I recognise, like, I'm being pretty open about this on our pod today. I'm not usually quite this open, and it does sound like I'm doing a bit of parent shaming. I probably am, and that's pretty unusual for me. I want to be supportive. I want to be in parents' corners. Am I taking it for granted that not every parent knows a whole lot of stuff about child development? Am I taking it for granted that what I know, what we talk about in this podcast is not common knowledge? It just doesn't make sense to me that parents are pushing their kids under the age of 4, 5, 6, even 7 or 8 into so many scheduled activities. It's not in the child's best interest. Is it possible that parents are so distracted by what they're seeing on social media or by their own hopes for their children that they don't understand child development? Like you said, they've lost trust. They've lost trust in their ability to read their child and what's good for their child.
I don't think that they've lost trust in it. That they've never trusted it. They actually have never trusted that they actually know what their child needs, because you read one book and it tells you to do X, Y, and Z, and then the next book's a total.
Well, they haven't been reading my book.
Contradiction.
Everyone in these
well, your book
needs
would be a contradiction to most books out there.
Yeah, it probably is. All right, after the break, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to lay out the developmental case against overscheduling our kids, why too many activities has a negative impact on them, and especially starting too young. We're going to talk about what we can do instead and how to find the sweet spot so that when our children are the right developmental stage, we can get them involved in the appropriate number of the appropriate activities at the appropriate time for the appropriate reasons. That's all coming up in just a sec. All right, the developmental case against overscheduling our kids, starting them off too young and so on. First off, when they're too young, they just don't get the downtime to figure things out. And frankly, you're mostly wasting your time and money because it's not sinking in. A 9-month-old is not going to learn how to be a baby Mozart.
But you also take the joy out of it because there is an adult in the room who is dictating what needs to happen in order for them to progress, right?
Yeah.
Instead of allowing them to just explore and actually enjoy whatever the activity is, whether it be kicking a ball. We're now in a formalised soccer game as a 3-year-old, as opposed to just being in the backyard having a kick with dad.
Cheaper and probably more fun.
Well, not only more fun, it's the relationship that develops and grows, the connection that that child experiences with one trusted adult, as opposed to being in a class with a whole heap of 3-year-olds that don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, as children get older as well, we find that there are going to be impacts on schoolwork, family time, sleep, stress levels. In fairness and in deference to some families that I've seen who really do schedule their children extremely heavily, I was doing a PR campaign. There was a young boy who was involved in that campaign some years ago. He was doing 11. I spoke to his mum. He was doing 11 extracurricular activities a week. Now, I do not know, number one, how you pay for that many extracurricular activities a week. Number two, how you get your child to that many extracurricular activities a week. He was doing music, he was doing drama, he was doing art, he was doing sport, and he was doing multiples of each.
I would suggest that she wasn't getting him to all of them based on our experiences at different schools. I would say that a lot of his extracurriculars would have been a part of his school education.
Probably also worth adding, they did have a nanny, which would definitely make that easier. But the impact of doing that many activities on a child is significant. Now, I mean, he was well adjusted. He was a really happy kid, seemed fantastic. But over time, it's just a lot. There are known and well documented physical dangers of doing too many sports, particularly early sports specialization from an injury point of view, overuse of growing bones and muscles, and also burnout. And I think the other thing that I've seen happen is a lot of parents will be like, well, because I'm keeping my child that busy when they are home, they just use the screen because they're doing so much. I don't have to worry about them being on the screen because I've got them in so many structured activities. And I kind of feel like there's this irony here that we schedule all of this enrichment, but we could actually create stressed out screen dependent kids because there's so much going on. Provocative take, but I just think there's an argument against, a really strong argument against overscheduling. And like I said, in researching for this particular podcast episode, I saw so much of it.
So I guess on the flip side of that, if we're not overscheduling our kids, then we run the risk that they get bored or worse, they're under our feet all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is often part of the challenge that parents have. If I don't put the kids into this activity, then I'm going to spend the whole afternoon with them at me because they're bored. I don't want them on a screen. I want them outside.
Yeah, or they'll be at me to get on the screen all afternoon. Yeah. So there is a dark side to boredom, depression, anxiety. If you're bored and you don't have resources and don't do anything about the boredom, don't get creative, don't get active, then boredom has a dark side. Mummy bloggers love to write about the benefits of boredom, but I think that boredom can be quite dangerous.
It's interesting that you say that to me because before screens were an option, where was anxiety and depression levels at that point?
Well, we have good data that shows that anxiety and depression levels still existed, but were nowhere near the levels they are today.
Yeah. So I look at my childhood and I grew up in, I would consider an average family, but we didn't have the means to do a lot of extracurricular activities and I didn't do any. But I don't remember ever sitting in my room staring at the walls thinking I'm bored. And I feel like as a result of overscheduling our kids and introducing handheld screens into their world, we've actually created boredom because they don't know how to do anything on their own because there's always something there.
Always so much stimulation.
To stimulate them.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I've spoken about this on the podcast a couple of times, but it's so important. I want to keep on emphasizing it. There's this part of your brain called the default mode network. That is when your brain doesn't have anything to do, it slips into default mode and a whole different network of the brain kicks off. When the default mode network is active, well, it's active because you're not on a screen. There's no stimulation. There's nothing exciting your brain. And so you get to do what you just get to think about stuff. So you might think about what you've got to do this afternoon or this weekend. You might think about the holiday that you're planning. You might think about the person that you've got a crush on if you're a teenager. You might think about who you are, what your values are. You might think about that thing that you said earlier that, was that a mistake? Should I apologize for that? You start to do the inner work. You work on your identity. That's the default mode network's job. And our kids, because they're so stimulated and because they're so scheduled, especially in some of these communities and postcodes that I'm referring to, they don't get the chance to do the inner work. There's a values deficit. And we hear all these stories all the time about kids that are getting up to no good. Now, part of that is because teenagers have always been a little bit challenging, but part of it is because they're not doing the inner work. They don't have the downtime to, quote unquote, be bored, to sit in their room and go, who am I and what am I about? I might journal. Like, how many kids journal today versus 10, 20, 30 years ago? It's almost a lost art form. Or sit down and write a letter and open up your heart. When you write, you process things differently. You're thinking in different ways. These are the things that help people to develop their character, help them to develop their values. And because we overschedule our children, they have lost the art of daydreaming, and it's important for cognitive development and for identity development. So we need to find a sweet spot. That's the whole purpose of this podcast. We've kind of covered a whole lot of different areas and been quite broad here. But if I was to bring it right back, when it comes to your children, they need downtime. But we also want them to have enrichment activities so that they can succeed in life. Over the years, as we have raised 6 children, we've come up with some fairly clear guidelines around what we think works to find the sweet spot so that children are activated and engaged in life and doing things, but not overscheduled, burdened, stressed, and then looking for every opportunity to stare at a screen when they're not doing anything.
When you say that, the words that come to my mind is the extracurricular activities that our children engage in should actually feel like a joy point in their lives. It literally should feel like this is the highlight of my week.
When I talk
it's a holiday, right, from the norm.
I do my parenting presentation on resilience, and I share the story about how our daughter Chanel wanted to ride velodrome track cycling with me. And for the first 3 weeks, she loved it. And then when she got her backside completely handed to her every single week, she decided she didn't want to do it anymore. She wasn't enjoying it. Number one, she didn't really have relationships with the other girls. Number two, she was not competent. She was being absolutely annihilated.
Well, there was no one else her age. She was actually competing against kids who were much older than her.
And they were lapping her in every race. The situation got so dire, though. I mean, I was saying, well, I paid for the bike, we paid for the kit, you're going to come down, you're going to race, that I literally grabbed her by the arm and I dragged her to the car. I'm like, you're going to race tonight because I've spent all this money and you're going to do this. This is the extracurricular activity that you wanted to do. I remember thinking as I was dragging her to the car, why am I doing this? Who is this for? Because it's clearly not for her anymore. Like this is for me, not for my ego, but maybe for me to feel better about having spent all the money.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And I really did want her to fall in love with cycling so we could have that activity that we could do together. That was important to me as well. But it ended up that it was just a better decision. Once you're dragging them to the car, it's not bringing them joy and it's not a release for them from their regular activities. So I love that. I love that insight. We've essentially decided in our family, and every family will be different based on the number of kids you've got and what your financial and time resources are. But we've decided that 1 or 2 activities per week is probably enough. And those activities have to be based on the child's genuine interests, not the parents. Not because this is what I did when I was a kid, not because I'm ambitious for my child to go on and do this or do that in their lives. It's just got to be that. The other sweet spot, and we've talked about this many times on the podcast, it's finding time for quality togetherness as a family. It's non-negotiable, whether it's Super Saturday or you're having a family night one night in the week or whatever that might be.
I think my extension on that is, as I think about our 11-year-old specifically, the joy point in her week is the time when she's able to connect with her friends. So I actually, as we've gone through this process, feel like those connection points with friends who are like-minded and enjoy the same kinds of activities has more health benefit to her, mentally, emotionally, and physically, than any other extracurricular activity we put her in.
Let me get really concrete about this. Her favourite time of the week is Wednesday afternoon when you go down to the local park and meet up with some homeschool families and the kids run around in a completely unstructured way with no expectations and no priorities and no competition. They just play for 3 to 4 hours on a Wednesday afternoon and they are in heaven. Like it's their favourite thing. So it's not a scheduled, structured activity. Rather, it's an unstructured activity where they're figuring out relationships, they're solving the world's problems as 11-year-olds do, and they're just having fun. And that really is the uncomplicated truth about what our children need when it comes to scheduled activities and being overscheduled or not getting enough play. Sometimes the best thing for a child is simply the freedom to be a child. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. For more information and more resources to make your family happier, please visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.